Hey A&P Peers, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is A&P 1, Lecture Test 5, video, well, we're on page 23, so there's probably video 22. Yeah, 22, page 23. Excellent. So I was able to record the previous video with my visuals, but it took forever for the computer to process it and record it, so I had to shut down like everything on the computer, and I already had the internet shut off and the Bluetooth and all that, like just trying to open up brain space, but I don't know. So we're going to cover page 23 with this video. We're going to start at 14.6, the cerebellum coordinates learned and reflexive patterns. So there are two primary functions of the cerebellum. There are one, to adjust the postural muscles of the body, and two, to fine-tune conscious and subconscious movements. I think it was in one of the videos I recorded the other day that I mentioned that there's a lot of research going on in the cerebellum, and they're starting to research it and find a lot of interesting stuff that the cerebellum does that we didn't know about. One of the articles I read said that used to be when they would study the brain, they would get the brain and chop off the cerebellum and then study the brain. And turns out the cerebellum actually does stuff. So there's more than what we are covering. Okay, here's our picture of the cerebellum. So the folia are the raised folds, these little raised, okay, that's not a pen. Okay, we're going with red. So the raised folds, remember on the brain, well, the cerebrum of the brain, the raised folds were called gyri. Here the raised folds are folia. And we're not learning the names of the indentation. It kind of looks like ground beef. The vermis is this midline narrow structure. It means worm. If you do vermicomposting, you compost with worms. And it's a midline narrow band of cortex. The cerebellar hemispheres are the two halves of the cerebellum, the left cerebellar hemisphere or the right cerebellar hemisphere. Now, please be careful because this is the cerebrum and this is the cerebellum. So cerebral hemispheres, cerebellar hemispheres. And the arbor vitae. So when you cut the cerebellum, well, they've got the cut here as mid-sagittal, but if you cut the cerebellum, you can see the white matter inside, and it's kind of branchy like a tree. And so they call it the arbor vitae, which is like, forgive me, arbol de vida. It's been a while since I've had anybody correct my punctuation on that, so I kind of drift. So the arbor vitae is same as arbol de vida, which is tree of life. So this is the white matter in the cerebellum, and it does all kinds of fun stuff that we're just now learning about in the 2020s. So fun stuff. And ataxia and some of its causes. Ataxia is a disturbance in muscle coordination. It can be permanently caused by trauma or stroke, and some temporary causes are things like drugs and alcohol. It's basically where you're uncoordinated and you fall down. Moving on to 14.7, the diencephalon integrates sensory information. The diencephalon, as we've discussed, is made up of the epithalamus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. I wonder if I have a picture for that. Sort of. Okay, so here's the thalamus. And I don't think we have a specific picture of the hypothalamus here. No, okay. The pineal gland, which is on the same side, it's right by the corpora quadrigemini. So the pineal gland is this right here. And it secretes the hormone melatonin, which functions to regulate day-night sleep cycles and reproductive function. We will talk more about the pineal gland and melatonin next semester, 2402, with the endocrine test. The sensory information synapses in the thalamus, left thalamus or right thalamus, on its way up to our conscious awareness. So the thalamus is a sensory filter. There are lots of synapses there in the ascending tracts, the sensory information going up to the brain. And it helps filter out unimportant information, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The hypothalamus contains centers involved with emotions and visceral processes. And the hypothalamus is also the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, which again we will talk about a whole lot more next semester. So now let's talk about the thalamus. The thalamus, let's see what our next picture is. Okay, but you can also see the part of the thalamus here, and then the hypothalamus here. Okay. So the thalamus, shows better in the other picture. Okay. The thalamus acts as a filter of incoming sensory information, passing only a little on to the primary sensory cortex. It helps you, keeps you sane, by filtering out unimportant information. Like, can you feel your underwear? Normally I ask this in a classroom where we can assume that most people have clothes on. So if you can't feel your underwear because you don't have on underwear, please, please, for all that is good and holy, I do not want to know about it. But before I asked the question, if you could feel your underwear, then I submit you need to buy more comfortable underwear because life is too short for uncomfortable underwear. I said what I said. The right and left thalami are separated by the third ventricle, and here you can see the third ventricle right here between the left thalamus and the right thalamus. And the interthalamic adhesion connects the left thalamus to the right thalamus through the third ventricle. And again, on nuclei, we are skipping them, but they're really quite fascinating. So I'm going to shut this video off now before we talk more about underwear. And we're going to hope that it saves. So thank you as always for tuning in. The education must go on. Dr. J out.